What if I told you that a missing woman, pregnant and alone, simply vanished one October morning, and for 7 long years, nobody knew what really happened to her? 7 years of silence. 7 years of her family waking up every single day, looking at an empty chair at the dinner table not knowing if she was alive or dead. 7 years of a case that went cold, until one ordinary afternoon, a stray dog wandered into the wrong backyard, and what was hanging from that dog's collar changed everything. Now here's the question that's going to keep you watching this entire video. How does a dog, a stray, nameless dog with no home and no owner, end up being the only witness to a crime that stumped investigators for nearly a decade? The answer is more disturbing than anything you've probably heard this week. And I want you to think about something before we even get into this story. Think about all the things in your life that you just kind of assume will always be there. Your morning routine, the people who check in on you, the comfort of knowing that if something went wrong, someone would notice, someone would come looking. Maria Caldwell had all of that. She had people who loved her. She had a mom who called every Sunday. She had a brother who would have walked through fire for her, and none of it was enough to protect her. But here's what's remarkable, and this is the part of the story that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. It was enough to find her. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how this happened, who was responsible, and why this case is a masterclass in how the truth, no matter how deep it's buried, has a way of crawling back up to the surface. Stay with me, because this story doesn't go where you think it goes. And I promise you, the detail that comes out around the 18-minute mark, you are not going to see it coming. Let's go back to October 2014. The leaves were changing. Football season was in full swing. Most people were busy with the normal stuff: work, family dinners, weekend plans. And in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in the American Midwest, a woman named Maria Caldwell was getting ready for her day. Maria was 28 years old. She was 5 months pregnant with her first child. A little girl, actually. She had already picked out a name. She had a list of names, actually, written in a little notebook she kept on her nightstand. The name she had circled, the one she kept coming back to, was one her grandmother had carried. Something old. Something that meant something. By all accounts, Maria was the kind of person who made the world a little warmer just by being in it. Her co-workers at the insurance firm where she worked as an office manager talked about how she remembered everyone's birthday. Not just the big ones, everyone's. She kept a little calendar on her desk, and every single morning she would check it, and if it was your birthday, there would be a card on your desk before you got in. Her neighbors always waved when she pulled into the driveway. The guy across the street later told investigators that he always felt better when he saw Maria's lights on at night, like the neighborhood was more alive when she was home. Her mom called her every single Sunday morning without fail, had done it for years. It was their thing. Coffee on both ends of the phone, catching up on the week, making plans, talking about the baby. Maria's mom had already started buying things. Little onesies, a tiny pair of yellow shoes. But here's what's important for you to understand right now, because this is the context that shapes everything that follows. Maria had recently gone through a breakup. A rough one. The kind where one person moves on just a little too quickly and the other one is still standing in the kitchen wondering what happened. The father of her child, a man we'll call Derek throughout this video to protect the integrity of the investigation and some of the individuals involved, had ended things about 3 months before she disappeared. It was messy. It was painful. There were conversations that probably should have happened and didn't. And Maria was left holding a lot of it. The grief of the relationship ending, the weight of a pregnancy she was now navigating mostly alone, and the very real, very practical challenges of figuring out what her life was going to look like. But here's what I want you to know about Maria Caldwell. She was not falling apart. She had thrown herself into preparing for her baby. She had repainted the nursery, twice actually, because the first color wasn't quite right. She had assembled the crib herself, which took her an entire Saturday, and involved a lot of creative language directed at the instruction manual. She had made lists, she had plans, she had a future she was actively building. She was doing okay. She was more than okay. She was someone who had taken a hit and was getting back up. And then, on October 14th, 2014, her mom called on Sunday morning, like always. No answer. She called again. Nothing. She called Janelle, Maria's closest friend, to see if Maria had mentioned any plans. Janelle hadn't heard from her since the night before. She called 2 other friends. Nobody had spoken to Maria since Saturday evening. By noon, Maria's mom had driven across town to check on her. She had a key. She'd always had a key. The kind of practical arrangement that makes sense when you're close to someone and anything could happen. She let herself in and called out. The front door was unlocked. Maria's car was in the driveway. Her coffee was half made in the kitchen, still in the pot, though it had clearly been sitting there for a while. Dark and cold and untouched. Her phone was on the kitchen counter. Her keys were on the hook by the door. Her shoes, both pairs, the ones she wore to work and the ones she wore on weekends, were right where she always left them, by the entrance mat. Her purse was on the chair in the living room. Her wallet was inside it, her ID, her cards, everything. Maria was gone, and nothing in that house looked like she had planned to leave. Her mom stood in that kitchen for a long moment. She described it later as the feeling of the floor tilting underneath her, like the world had shifted a few degrees in a direction it wasn't supposed to go. Then she called the police. The police were called. An investigation started. And for a brief, terrifying moment, it looked like this was going to get solved fast. But what investigators found in the first 48 hours would actually take them completely in the wrong direction. And that mistake, that one early mistake, would cost 7 years. When police first arrived at Maria's house, they did what investigators always do in a missing persons case. They walked through the house carefully, noting everything. They dusted for fingerprints. They took photographs. They talked to the neighbors, going door to door on the whole block, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything unusual on Saturday night or Sunday morning. One neighbor, an elderly man named Earl, who lived 2 houses down, mentioned that he thought he had heard a car idling on the street sometime around 6 or 7 in the morning on Sunday. He hadn't looked outside. He assumed it was someone warming up their car before work. He went back to sleep. That detail was logged. It would become important later. The investigators checked the security footage from the gas station 2 blocks down, the one with the camera facing the street. The footage was grainy, the way a lot of small gas station cameras are, but it showed the street in front of Maria's neighborhood for a portion of Sunday morning. There was a car, dark-colored, parked on the side of the road for about 12 minutes around 6:45 in the morning. The plate was not readable. They interviewed her co-workers. They pulled her phone records. They went through her email. They checked her social media. And here's where things started to get interesting. The last text message Maria sent was on Saturday night, the night before her mom called. It was to Janelle and it said, "I'm meeting someone tomorrow morning. Not sure how it's going to go, but I have to try." Janelle had texted back asking what she meant, whether she was okay, whether she needed company. Maria never replied. Investigators asked Janelle what she thought Maria had meant. Janelle said she didn't know, assuming it was about the pregnancy or a doctor, or maybe a difficult conversation with Derek about custody, money, or future arrangements. That text message sat at the center of the investigation for a long time. Who? Where? Why did it feel uncertain? Why did she say, "I have to try"? Investigators quickly made a connection that seemed obvious at the time. Derek, the ex-boyfriend and father of the baby, lived 12 minutes from Maria's house. He had motive, a messy breakup, a baby coming, complicated feelings, financial pressure. People said he had been volatile, emotional, up and down since the breakup. They brought him in for questioning within 48 hours. Derek was a mess in that interview, visibly shaking, his voice cracked. He kept putting his head in his hands, stumbling over words about his schedule. When asked where he was Sunday morning, he said home alone, sleeping. His phone was off from drinking the night before. No alibi. For investigators, this looked like a done deal. Classic profile, upset ex-boyfriend. Complicated pregnancy, no alibi, nervous in the interview room. Except there was no evidence. No DNA, no blood, no signs of struggle at Maria's house. Nothing in his apartment, car, or under his fingernails. His phone data showed no movement. His phone data placed him in the vicinity of his own apartment for the entire morning. He passed a polygraph, not perfectly, but well enough. He cooperated, letting them search his apartment, car, and phone. After 2 weeks, the investigation hit its first wall. Maria's family went on the news, exhausted and hollow. They held her work ID photo where she was smiling. Flyers went up everywhere. A tip line was set up. Tips poured in. Sightings in gas stations, bus stops, motels, and truck stops. Every single lead was followed. Every single lead went cold. By February 2015, 4 months later, the case was inactive. Maria's file went into a cabinet as investigators moved to newer cases. And that's where most cases like this stay, forever. But this one didn't. Thanks to one man who refused to let it go. And one discovery nobody could have planned for. To understand why it mattered, you need to know what one person was building, quietly, for 6 years, while the world moved on. Here's where the story gets complicated and heartbreaking. While the official investigation wound down, Maria's brother Theo was not giving up. Theo was 31 when Maria disappeared, working in IT. He was not a detective, had no law enforcement training. He was just a guy who knew computers and loved his sister more than anything. He couldn't accept that she had simply vanished. He took 2 weeks unpaid leave, spent at his mother's kitchen table, going through hotline tips, news reports, social media posts, geographic data. He started mapping. He built a spreadsheet first, every reported sighting with the date, location, description, and source. Then he started pulling coordinates. He used a free mapping tool online and began pinning every single data point. The first week, it looked like noise. Random dots scattered across half the country, as if someone had been traveling. But as he kept adding data points over months, something started to emerge. The pattern was not random. The sightings were not evenly distributed. They were not spread as if someone had left by bus or train. They were clustered, loosely, messily. These were unverified tips from strangers, but clustered nonetheless. The overwhelming majority fell within a radius of about 40 miles from Maria's home. And in the middle of that cluster, there was a gap. A geographic area with very few sightings. It sat right at the center of the density around it, like the eye of something. That area corresponded to a stretch of rural land along an old county road about 22 miles from Maria's neighborhood. Agricultural land mostly, flat and quiet. The kind of place where almost nothing happened on most days. Theo took this to the police in March 2015. He had printed out the map and annotated it. He had written a 3-page summary of his methodology. He walked the detective through the whole thing. The detective listened politely. He thanked Theo. He said they would take it under advisement. He noted that the tip line data was inherently unreliable. Most of it doesn't mean what people think. Theo went home and kept building the map. He went back in September 2015 with updated data. Same response. Polite, professional, nothing. He went back again in early 2017. The case had been inactive for 2 years. There was a different detective handling it now. This new detective was not unkind, but she was honest. Without physical evidence or a credible witness, there was nothing to authorize a new search based on his map. Theo went home. He kept the map on his laptop in a folder he labeled simply Maria. He updated it when new tips came in, even after the tip line officially closed and the family set up their own hotline. For 6 years, that map sat there. 6 winters, 6 springs, 6 summers. His mom calling him and asking if there was any news and him telling her no, not yet. But he was still working on it. He never stopped. Now I want to ask you something directly, because I think this is important. Think about someone you love, someone you would do anything for. And imagine being told by the people whose job it is to find answers that your work, the careful, methodical, months-long work you have done, is not enough, that you will need to wait, that there is nothing they can do right now. And then imagine doing that, every day, for 6 years. That is who Theo Caldwell was. That is what love looks like when the world stops cooperating. And then, in the summer of 2021, something happened that even Theo's map couldn't have predicted. A stray dog showed up at a farmhouse about 18 miles from where Maria disappeared. And what that dog had wrapped around its collar would do more for this case than 6 years of investigations combined. But I need you to understand just how close we came to missing it entirely. July 2021. A Tuesday morning, early. A retired couple, I'm going to call them the Harmons, lived on a small property about 18 miles outside of town. They had a vegetable garden that Mr. Harmon tended with an almost religious dedication. Tomatoes, squash, green beans, a row of sunflowers along the back fence that Mrs. Harmon had planted the first summer they moved there and replanted every year since. They had a few chickens, a cat named Biscuit who was 17 years old and deeply opinionated about everything. They had no dogs. They had no particular connection to the Maria Caldwell case. They were not people who followed true crime. They were not aware of the investigation, the tip line, the Facebook group. They were just two people living quietly in the countryside, drinking their coffee in the morning, watching their garden grow. That Tuesday morning, Mrs. Harmon opened her back door to let Biscuit out. There was a dog on the porch, a big dog, shepherd mix, part German shepherd, part something else, something rangier and more angular, skinny in a way that suggests weeks of not enough food, not just a missed meal. The fur was matted in places. There was a long, healed scratch along one side. The eyes were tired but calm, the eyes of an animal that has been through a lot and has learned to wait. No tags, no visible identification of any kind. The dog looked up at Mrs. Harmon and then looked away, toward the garden. She brought it water, then food, some leftover chicken from the night before, which the dog ate slowly and carefully. Mr. Harmon came outside and they both crouched down to examine the dog more carefully. He was calm about being touched. He wasn't feral. He was lost, or had been lost for a very long time. Nobody was looking for him anymore. There was a collar. It was old. The fabric faded to a color that had once been blue or maybe green. Stiff in places from years of weather. The kind of collar that becomes something else over time. Mr. Harmon ran his fingers along the collar looking for a tag, a name, anything, and he felt something. And he felt, tucked under the fabric of the collar, wrapped around it and secured by the tightness of the fit, was a piece of folded plastic. The thick kind. The kind that comes from packaging. The kind that doesn't break down easily in the elements. It was dirty and stiff, but intact. Mrs. Harmon thought it was trash at first. Debris that had gotten caught in the collar somewhere along the dog's long journey. She almost just pulled it off and threw it in the compost bin. But something about the way it was folded, the deliberateness of it, the way it had clearly been wrapped and secured, made her stop. She unfolded it carefully. Inside the plastic, protected from years of exposure, was a piece of cloth. A small rectangle, maybe the size of an index card, cut from something, a shirt, a towel, a piece of fabric. And on that cloth, written in ink that had faded but was still legible, the plastic had done its job. Were two things. A date, October 2014, and a name. Mrs. Harmon sat back on her heels in the morning light and looked at what she was holding. She looked at her husband. He looked at her. Neither of them knew yet what it meant. Neither of them had any way to know. But they knew it was something. The Harmons took the dog to their local veterinarian that afternoon to be checked for a microchip. Standard practice with any found animal, something they'd done before with strays that wandered onto the property. The vet found a chip, old, the kind that had been implanted maybe 10 or 12 years ago, but still readable. The chip was registered to a property, an address on a rural agricultural parcel about 4 miles from where the Harmons lived. The registration was old. The property had changed hands twice since the chip was registered, and the current owner was a land management company. The Harmons called animal control to report the found dog and get him properly logged into the system as required. The officer who came out was friendly, efficient, took the basic information, and filed the report. And that should have been the end of it, except a few days after the report was filed, a young deputy named Rosa Chen happened to be doing something that most people in her position wouldn't have prioritized in their first few months on the job. She was reviewing old cold case files. Rosa had joined the department 4 months earlier, fresh out of the academy, full of the particular kind of energy that comes from having studied something intensely and being newly unleashed to actually do it. One of her instructors at the academy had talked extensively about cold cases. about how the biggest enemy of a cold case is not time, but the passage of attention, and about how sometimes all it takes to break a case open is someone new looking at old information with fresh eyes. Rosa had taken that to heart. In whatever spare time her shift allowed, she had been reading through old inactive files. Not all of them, there were too many, but ones that caught her attention for one reason or another. The Caldwell file had caught her attention because of Theo's map. It had been included in the case file when Theo submitted it in 2015, and then updated versions had been added with each of his subsequent visits. Rosa had looked at the map and thought it was genuinely interesting, well-constructed, methodical. The kind of analysis that deserved more engagement than it had apparently received. When she processed the animal control report and saw the property address from the microchip registration, something clicked. She pulled up Theo's map on her screen and compared the address. It was inside the cluster, not just inside it. It was near the center of it. She sat with that for a moment. Then she pulled up the full Caldwell case file and spent 2 hours reading it from the beginning. Then she went to her sergeant. She did not go in with certainty. She went in with a question. Given this property address and its relationship to this civilian-submitted geographic analysis, would it be worth doing a targeted search of that specific area? Not a wide sweep. A focused one. With the right equipment? Her sergeant, to his credit, listened. He read through what she put in front of him. He made some calls. Within 3 days, a search team had been authorized and deployed to the rural property indicated by the microchip registration in Theo's cluster. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar. And I need you to understand what that means. Ground-penetrating radar can detect disturbances in the soil that happened years ago. Disturbances that look completely normal on the surface but leave a signature underground. What they found on that property on July 19, 2021, is something I want to tell you carefully because it matters not just as a fact but as a moment in a story that has been building for 7 years. Maria Caldwell's remains were found on July 19, 2021. She had been buried on the rural property, approximately a quarter mile from an old grain storage building, in a section of land that had been disturbed years earlier and then left to grow over. Grass and weeds and seasons of rain, the land doing what land does, slowly erasing what had been done to it. The ground-penetrating radar found the disturbance on the second pass over the area. The team flagged the location. The forensic investigators came in. I'm not going to describe the physical condition of the remains. That is not what this story is about. And the details of it belong to Maria and to her family, not to a YouTube video. What I will tell you is what the forensic investigators found alongside her, because those details are what matters for the rest of this story. They found a broken locket, small, gold-toned, the kind that opens to hold a photograph. It was damaged. The hinge had snapped, but it was intact enough to be identified. Maria's mother, when she was shown a photograph of it, confirmed immediately that it had been a birthday gift. She had given it to Maria on her 25th birthday. Maria wore it most days. She had been wearing it when she disappeared. They found an ink pen, a basic ballpoint, the kind you find in any office, any kitchen drawer, any purse. The kind of pen you don't think twice about until it becomes the most important object in a 7-year investigation. And they found a piece of cloth, similar in material and size to the piece of cloth that had been found on the dog's collar. Cut from what appeared to be the same source. Investigators would later confirm this through textile analysis. Same fabric, same thread count, same original color, faded identically by the same conditions. And here is what investigators believe happened based on the physical evidence at the scene and the forensic analysis that followed. In her final hours, Maria Caldwell, 5 months, pregnant, alone and aware that something terrible was unfolding, found a way to leave a message. She had a pen. She had a piece of fabric she could tear, and there was a dog. The dog that lived on or around the property, a stray that had found something like a home near the old grain building, the dog that would carry her message for 7 years without knowing what it carried. She wrote a date. October 2014. She wrote a name. She wrapped the cloth in plastic to protect it. She secured it to the dog's collar. And then the dog wandered, the way dogs do, through seasons and miles and years, through the territory of the rural county where she had been left, past farmhouses and fields and roadsides, eventually, onto the back porch of a retired couple who grew tomatoes and sunflowers and had a 17-year-old cat. Named Biscuit, I have spent a lot of time with a lot of true crime cases. I have read about victims who fought back, victims who survived impossible situations, victims who found ways to communicate even when everything was stripped from them. I cannot think of a case that moves me more than this one, because Maria Caldwell, in the worst and last moments of her life, was still thinking about the people who would be looking for her. She was still thinking about her mom, her brother, the people who loved her. She found a pen, she found a piece of cloth, she found a dog, and she refused to disappear completely. But we still haven't talked about the name on that cloth. And when I tell you whose name it was, I need you to understand that it was not the name anyone expected. Not the name that had been at the center of this investigation for 7 years. Not Derek, someone else entirely. And the story of how that name led to an arrest, a trial, and a conviction is something I want to walk you through carefully because every detail matters. The name on the cloth was not Derek's. I want to give you a moment with that because I know it reframes a lot of what we've talked about. Derek, the ex-boyfriend, the man who had been questioned within 48 hours, the man whose nervousness in an interview room had colored the entire early phase of this investigation, was not the name on that piece of cloth. The name Maria had written in the last hours of her life, with a ballpoint pen on a torn piece of fabric, belonged to a man named Gary Elston. Gary Elston was 44 years old. He was not a dramatic figure. He did not have a history of violence that jumped off the page. He was not someone who, if you had met him at a hardware store or a diner, would have set off any particular alarm. He had briefly worked as a property manager for a small portfolio of rental units in the county, including one that Maria's family owned and occasionally used, a small property that her parents had bought years earlier as a rental investment. Maria had been handling some of the administrative paperwork for that property on her family's behalf for about a year before she disappeared. She had met Gary through that arrangement. He was not a friend. He was not someone she socialized with. He was a professional contact at the outer edge of her life, the kind of person you exchange emails with, maybe exchange brief phone calls with, someone you might nod to if you passed each other at the county recorder's office. He had never been on a suspect list. He had never been interviewed. Not once in the entire 7-year span of the investigation had his name come up in any documented way. When investigators received the cloth from the forensic team and saw the name on it, they ran it immediately. Gary Elston. They cross-referenced it against every existing record in the Caldwell investigation. Nothing. He was not there. Then they started building from scratch. Within 48 hours of the discovery, investigators had assembled the following. Gary Elston had a prior conviction for harassment. Not physical violence, but a sustained pattern of unwanted contact with a woman he had met through work. The conviction was years old, from a different county, and had been expunged after he completed the terms of his probation. It did not appear on standard background checks. It had never surfaced in the original investigation because no one had ever had reason to run his name. In the years following Maria's disappearance, Gary had moved 3 times, not unusual on its own. But the timing of each move corresponded fairly precisely with moments when press coverage of the Caldwell case resurged. The 1-year anniversary, the 2-year anniversary, the periodic news segments that Maria's family had managed to keep alive through sustained advocacy. He moved when the story got attention, each time. His cell phone data from October 2014, data that carriers retain for years and that investigators can subpoena with the right legal authorization, placed him within 2 miles of the property where Maria was found on the morning of October 14, 2014. 2 miles. At the right time. In an area with almost no population, almost no reason for anyone to be there on an early Sunday morning. And the property where Maria was buried? It had been adjacent to a parcel of land that Gary Elston had managed and had regular access to through his property management work throughout 2014. He knew that land. He had been on it legitimately, multiple times. He knew where the old grain building was. He knew where the quiet corners were. He knew where no one would look. Gary Elston was arrested in September 2021. He was taken into custody at his apartment, the third apartment he had moved to since Maria disappeared, and charged with first-degree murder. The trial began 14 months later. It was not a short trial. The defense worked hard, and the defense was not wrong to point out that the case was largely circumstantial. There was no confession. There was no eyewitness who had seen what happened. The physical evidence from the scene, after 7 years, in the ground, was limited in what it could definitively establish. But there was the cloth. Forensic handwriting analysis confirmed, to a high degree of scientific confidence, that the writing on the cloth matched known exemplars of Maria Caldwell's handwriting. The name written there, Gary, in Maria's hand, on a piece of fabric she had torn, wrapped in plastic and placed on a dog, was Maria's final testimony. The cell phone data placed Gary near the scene. The property history placed Gary with knowledge of and access to that land. A witness came forward after the arrest, a man who had been driving that county road early on the morning of October 14, 2014, who said he had seen a dark-colored truck parked near the grain building. He had not thought anything of it at the time. He had not connected it to the missing woman whose story he had later seen on the news, because he had not put the location together. But when investigators showed him the property on a map, he confirmed it. That was the place. He had seen a truck there. Gary Elston was convicted of first-degree murder in March 2023. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. When the verdict was read aloud in that courtroom, Maria's mother sat, completely still, the kind of stillness that is not peace but its own category of feeling, something beyond tears, beyond relief, beyond anything that has a simple name. And then she put her face in her hands. Theo was sitting next to her. He put his arm around her shoulder and held on. Now, I want to take a step back from the crime itself and talk about what this case actually teaches us, because I don't just want you to walk away from this video having heard a story, however powerful it is. I want you to walk away with something you can carry, something that changes how you think about justice, about investigations, about what it means to refuse to give up. So let's talk about what this case really reveals. I want to go through 4 things that I think this case makes undeniably clear, and I want to spend real time on each of them because they matter beyond this specific story. The first thing is this: cold cases are not dead cases. When the Caldwell investigation was marked inactive in early 2015, that was a practical decision, not a final one. There is a meaningful difference between inactive and closed. Inactive means the active investigative resources have been redirected, not that the case no longer exists, not that the evidence has been destroyed, not that justice is no longer possible. But in practice, for families living through it, the distinction can feel invisible. When no one is working it, when no one is calling with updates, when the detective you had is now working something else, it feels like it's over. What Maria's case proves in the most concrete way possible is that the evidence does not disappear just because the investigation pauses. Cell phone carrier data from October 2014 was still subpoenable and readable in July 2021, 7 years later. The textile on the cloth had survived those 7 years because someone had thought to protect it. Property records showing Gary's access to that land were still in the county files. The witness who had seen the truck had never been asked, because no one had known to ask him, but he remembered. Memory is more durable than we give it credit for. Evidence is more durable than we give it credit for. And forensic technology moves fast. Tools that did not exist or were not widely deployed in 2014 were standard practice by 2021. Ground-penetrating radar, improved DNA recovery techniques, better digital data analysis. There are over 250,000 unsolved missing persons cases in the United States right now. Many of them are sitting in inactive files. Many of them have more available evidence than anyone has yet had the resources or the attention to fully examine. Every year, technology improves. Every year, cold case units, the good ones, the well-funded ones, solve things that seemed unsolvable. Cold cases are not dead cases. They are waiting cases. The second thing is this: family advocates change outcomes. Theo Caldwell had no law enforcement training. He had a laptop, a spreadsheet program, a folder of tip-line data, and a grief that would not let him stop. And his work, that careful, methodical, months-long mapping project that 3 different investigators had politely declined to act on, directly and specifically led to the search that found his sister. Think about what that means. The geographic analysis that cracked this case was not produced by a funded investigative unit with access to professional tools and databases. It was produced by a man at his kitchen table who refused to accept that there was nothing he could do. This is documented across hundreds of cold cases. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has published extensive work on the role of family advocates in cold case resolution. The DOE Network, which coordinates civilian researchers working on unidentified remains and missing persons cases, has contributed to dozens of confirmed identifications. Families who create their own investigation groups, who maintain websites, who keep press attention alive, they change outcomes. Not always, not quickly, but they do. This is not a criticism of law enforcement. Investigators are working enormous caseloads with limited budgets and competing urgent priorities. It is simply an observation about where additional eyes, additional attention, and additional stubbornness can make a real difference. If you have a loved one with an open or inactive case, look into those organizations. Look into your state's cold case unit. There are frameworks for contributing meaningfully without interfering. Theo's story is not unique. It can happen again. The third thing is this: confirmation bias in investigations is not just an error. It can be catastrophic. From the first 48 hours, this investigation developed a focal point: Derek. And Derek made sense as a focal point. He had a relationship with the victim. He had a complicated emotional situation involving the pregnancy. He had no alibi. He was visibly nervous in questioning. None of that was wrong to notice. All of that was reasonable to investigate. But at some point, the investigation stopped genuinely exploring and started confirming. When Derek didn't crack, when the evidence didn't materialize, the response was not to fundamentally reconsider the hypothesis. It was to wait, to keep looking in the same direction, to assume the evidence would come. And in that space, that gap between the obvious suspect and the actual perpetrator, Gary Elston had 7 years. Confirmation bias is one of the most well-documented phenomena in investigative psychology. It is the tendency, once a hypothesis has formed, to unconsciously weight new information in ways that support that hypothesis and discount information that challenges it. It is not malicious. It is not incompetence. It is human cognition operating under pressure, doing what it evolved to do, which is to resolve uncertainty quickly and move forward. But in a murder investigation, resolving uncertainty quickly can mean never resolving it correctly. The antidote, and criminologists and forensic psychologists have written about this extensively, is structured skepticism, deliberate institutionalized processes that force investigators to regularly step back from their working hypothesis and ask, what would I expect to see if I were wrong? What evidence would I expect to find if someone else did this? Am I reading the absence of evidence as evidence of absence? Theo's map was in part a product of someone who had no hypothesis. He was not trying to confirm Derek's guilt or anyone else's. He was just looking at where the data pointed. And it pointed somewhere different. The fourth thing, and this is the one I keep coming back to, the one I think matters most, is this: the human instinct to leave a record is one of the most extraordinary things about us. Maria Caldwell, in circumstances I don't want to dwell on in detail, found a way to communicate. She did not have a phone. She could not call for help. But she had a pen and a piece of fabric she could tear and a dog that was nearby, and she used them. She thought in that moment about the people who would be looking for her. She thought about what they would need. She thought about Theo with His map? About her mom with her Sunday morning calls, about the investigators who had not found the answer yet, and she gave them the answer. Forensic psychologists who have studied victim behavior in extreme situations have documented this phenomenon. Across many cases, the instinct to be found, to leave a trace, to ensure that what happened does not go entirely unknown, is remarkably persistent. It surfaces even in conditions of extreme fear and physical distress. Hidden notes, scratched initials, carefully placed objects, small acts of communication performed in the hope that someone, someday, would know how to read them. It is not rational in the way we usually use that word. It is something deeper than rational. It is the refusal of the human self to be entirely erased. The insistence that what happened here mattered, that I was here, that someone should know Maria knew, and she made sure someone would. After Gary Elston's conviction, a few things happened that I think are worth knowing. Deputy Rosa Chen, the officer who made the connection between the found dog report and the Caldwell case file, was formally recognized by the department. A commendation, some press coverage that she handled quietly and without drama. She was 26 years old and had been on the job for less than 4 months. She later said in an interview that she had almost not looked at the animal control report that day. She had been behind on her processing log. She had a long stack of things to get through. She almost just filed it and moved on. She looked at it. She looked twice. And that was the difference. The Harmon family attended every day of the trial. They sat in the back of the courtroom and they did not speak to the press. They were just there, bearing witness, in the quiet way that some people do when they understand they have been part of something larger than themselves, something they didn't choose and couldn't have predicted. On the day of the verdict, Mrs. Harmon left flowers on the steps of the courthouse. She didn't sign a card. She didn't make a statement. She just left the flowers and went home. The dog, the stray shepherd, the one who had carried Maria's message for 7 years across miles of rural land, was adopted by the Harmon family. They named him Lucky. He eats well. He has claimed the back porch as his personal domain and appears to have made a full emotional recovery from whatever his life was before that Tuesday morning in July. And after the verdict, Theo Caldwell spoke to a journalist. The journalist asked him what he wanted people to take away from his sister's story. Theo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She never stopped trying to help us find her, even at the end. My sister was always the kind of person who thought about other people first. She left us a message because she knew we'd be looking for her. She knew we wouldn't give up. She was right about that. I just wish we'd been faster." He paused, and then he said, "She would have been a great mom." Okay, let's come back to where we started. A pregnant woman vanishes one October morning. Her keys are on the hook. Her shoes are by the door. Her coffee is still in the pot. 7 years of silence, 7 years of a family refusing to stop looking, of a brother building maps at his kitchen table while the official investigation sat in a cabinet. 7 years of a dog wandering through a rural county carrying something no one knew to look for. And then a retired woman opens her back door on a Tuesday morning to let the cat out, and the truth comes home. It sounds like fiction. It is not. The reason this case hit so hard, I've been thinking about why since I first came across it, is because it doesn't let you off the hook with easy feelings. It's not a satisfying story in the way that stories are supposed to be satisfying. The justice came, yes, but it came 7 years late. A woman died. A baby who had a name picked out for her never got to be born. A family spent 7 years in the particular hell of not knowing. What makes it bearable, what makes it matter, is Maria herself. What she did, what she chose to do in the last moments she had with the tools she had available. She chose to leave a trail. She chose to trust that someone would still be looking. She chose to believe that the truth was worth fighting for even when everything else was being taken from her. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If you're watching this and you have a loved one who is missing, or a case that has gone Cold, please look into the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the DOE Network, and your state's cold case unit. These resources exist. They help. And the work that family members do, the Theos of the world, with their spreadsheets and their maps and their refusal to accept that there is nothing to be done, that work matters more than most people realize. If this video was worth your time, and I hope it was, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, because every week we go deep on cases like this one. Cases that deserve more attention than they get. Patterns that deserve more scrutiny. Truths that took too long to come to light. And drop a comment. Tell me what part of this story hit you hardest. Was it the dog? The cloth? The name that nobody expected? Was it Theo and his map that nobody listened to for 6 years? Or was it something else? Some moment in this story that you're going to be turning over in your head for the rest of the day. I read every single one, and I will see you in the next video.